Hi folks, I was revisiting the theory of evolution from a Christian perspective recently. Someone loaned me a book, a recently published book by Christian theologian John Blanchard. The book is called, what's the name of it again? Why Are We Here? John Blanchard is probably best known for his very popular leaflet, Ultimate Questions. Anyway, I was reading through this book and came across a chapter on the theory of evolution. I used to believe that man was intelligently designed and that all of nature was intelligently designed back when I was a Christian, and I had no time for the theory of evolution or natural selection. So, of course, the reason for that was because God's word, the Bible, wouldn't allow it. And I think that's probably the motivation behind most Christians who deny the theory of evolution. So I was interested to see if this book had come up with anything new, anything that I didn't know about it beforehand. And the arguments weren't really very convincing for me as a non-believer. And in fact, the theory of evolution now is very, very important to me, because if we understand that all life on earth evolved from a common source, from very simple origins, then mankind is intimately related to the other animals and the plants. We're not a breed apart. We're not special in the sense that we have a soul and the rest, they're just dumb animals. We can't make that separation. And I think that's a good thing. It has been said by vegetarians that we're all Nazis when it comes to how we treat animals. There's some truth to that. When you think about the lives that animals lead, animals that are used for food, it often resembles a concentration camp. Think of factory farmed chickens. Think of cows that are forced to live in these indoor paddocks where they don't even have a life of any kind. They're not allowed to go out and graze, where chickens are not free roaming. It's very cruel, it's much more cruel than what goes on in the ordinary predatory lifestyles of animals other than man. Yes, when the lion attacks the gazelle, it's a very vicious thing that occurs, but at least the gazelle had a life before it got attacked. What we do to animals is on a whole other level of cruelty. And I think part of the reason why we let ourselves off the hook so easily for that kind of cruelty is because we're mankind made in the image of God, and they're just dumb animals. You know something? When a cow cries out in agony when a hot brand is put on its skin, it's going through exactly the same feeling that a human being does when a human being is tortured with something painfully hot. It's not different. A living creature is going through agony, whether that creature is a human, a cow, a dog or a cat or whatever. And I don't think we should let ourselves off the hook. You see, when you come to appreciate that there is no separation between mankind and the cats and the dogs and the wolves and the cows and the sheep, you can't let yourself off the hook the way you could before. You can't say, I'm a man and that's a dumb animal. That's your cousin on the evolutionary family tree. So if you're gonna eat it, at least eat that creature in a way that another predator would. Let it have a life before you kill it. Don't imprison it. Don't be a Nazi to it. See, it's so easy, it's so easy to condemn Nazi-like behavior among human beings to other fellow human beings. But animals are living creatures too, aren't they? They have feelings, don't they? They have sensitive bodies, don't they? They can scream just like we can scream. So why hurt them unnecessarily? Of course, I advocate a completely vegetarian position, but I do recognize that predation is natural. But what we do, the kind of predators that we are, is deeply unnatural. And it's deeply unnatural because of a religious ideology. So, we're Nazis to other animals. I mean, think about World War II. Think about the Nazi attitude to the Jews. Think about how easily they did what they did. It was because they regarded the Jews as subhuman. Which is exactly how we think of animals. We do what we do to them because we regard them as subhuman. The problem is that's really just a made-up word. There isn't human and subhuman. There's just a variety of life on Earth of which you are one species. Something to think about. So anyway, the reason that the Christian finds it so hard to embrace the theory of evolution is because this theory doesn't allow him to be special, doesn't allow mankind to be special. You can't have a fall from grace in a Garden of Eden, whether that was a literal event or a description of a symbolic description of some other kind of metaphysical event. You can't have it, because if we evolved, then we didn't fall from grace any more than a cat or a dog fell from grace. So I know there are Christians who embrace the theory of evolution, but I have no idea how they get around that and maintain the credibility of their religious beliefs. I suppose you would have to inject some kind of other dimension to the theory of evolution. You'd have to kind of say that God had mankind in mind when he started the evolutionary process that would ultimately end with mankind. It doesn't make any sense. Mankind is the way he is because of the pressures of the environment that he lives in, and evolution could have went in other directions. In fact, if the asteroid hadn't wiped out the dinosaurs, there probably would never be a mankind. It's accepted that there was the dinosaur age, then they were wiped out, and then after that event, mammals came along. So wonder what kind of a world we'd be living in if that event had never occurred. And again, I don't know how Christians get around the problem of the fact that where we find dinosaur fossils, we don't find mammal fossils. Where we find mammal fossils, we don't find dinosaur fossils. So you can't really have a picture where God at the beginning, whether it was a literal 7 days or a wider period of time, where God kind of went boom, and all the creatures were created, intelligently designed by him all at once. It just didn't happen that way. Now, I can't argue very strongly, if you want to take me to task and say, well, how do you know that the dinosaurs were wiped out before mammals came along? I'm not an expert in that field. But what I do understand is that there's no controversy about this in the field of science. This is all accepted, just like I can't really, give you all that many details on why the Earth is round and or how planetary orbits work. But this is all basic stuff around which there is no controversy. Dinosaurs, extinction event, mammals. Okay? Anyway, we're getting a little bit off track. But again, if you're a Christian watching this, how do you reconcile that with the biblical picture that man and all the animals, including the reptiles, existed together? So, evolution itself. The main argument in Blanchard's book against evolution, well, he states a number of things. One of his major criticisms was the inability of evolutionary biologists to explain the origin of life. And I do admit that that is a very great mystery. And yet, Blanchard was inclined to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater here, to say, well, if you can't explain the origin, if you can't explain how evolution started, then we just throw everything out. We throw the whole theory out. No, because what we're really doing is, the only evidence that we have access to is whatever we can see from the available data in the present. And we have to extrapolate backwards the most accurate picture that we can come up with, and it may involve some amount of guesswork to do with the past. So what we have are complex creatures, and we have a fossil record that we can access about what creatures looked like in the past and how things are as they are. So the evidence does appear to be there for evolution, even though we can't explain how evolution started. Evolution, the theory of evolution, is not a theory about how life started. It's a theory describing the process of life. That's it. It doesn't have to explain how life started. It just has to provide an accurate description of what has been going on with life throughout history. And I think it does that successfully. Now, the book admits that there is a form of evolution that does occur called microevolution. And there is also macroevolution, which the book denies occurs. To describe what these two things are, microevolution is when a creature adapts to a changing environment. A moth, there might be a population of white moths that ends up becoming a population of black moths because black is more survivable in a particular environment. These things do occur. Look at the differences in humans. We emerged from Africa originally, and we would have been black. We did not become white people until we were in colder climates where our skin couldn't absorb vitamin D all that effectively from the increased eumelanin in the skin that gave rise to the black pigmentation. So any humans that evolved with a lack of pigmentation could absorb vitamin D more effectively from the lesser solar radiation of colder climates. And so a white population develops away from equatorial regions. That's microevolution. Macroevolution are the big changes, like how a fish ends up crawling on land, developing lungs instead of gills, that kind of thing. The problem with Blanchard's argument that there's microevolution and there's macroevolution, one's true, the other's false. The problem is that microevolution and macroevolution are the same in principle. They're just different in degree. They're exactly the same phenomenon. So what he's actually asserting is that evolution can occur, but only as far as his religious belief system will allow. Right? The problem is, and I detected this big problem with his argument in that he seems to think that when you name something, it becomes an actual entity that is distinct from some other entity. It's a problem of language, and I know this is getting very technical, but it is important. Let me try to explain this. If I said to you casually that a wing and an arm are different things, you'd accept that. You know, if I had some models here in front of me, there's an arm, there's a wing, they're different things. But in a very basic sense, they're not. If you just think of the body as this, don't picture it with all the details, just picture it as this sort of amorphous lump of stuff that you can almost mold like plasticine into different shapes. So you have an appendage coming out of here, right? That appendage can serve any number of functions. If it grows out like this and it has this on the end of it, it's an arm. If it grows out and it grows down here and it has other appendages down here and feathers grow out of it, it's a wing. See what I mean? You have this thing called an organism out of which can form all kinds of stuff. It's kind of like Lego. You know, you can sit there with a lump of a kid can sit there with a bag full of Lego blocks, and he can take them and he can put them together and he's got a fire station, or he can put them together and he's got a truck. You know, there is no actual entity called fire station. There is no actual entity called truck. Those are just descriptions based on what you see. There's just the bricks, and the bricks can take whatever shape they want. So there's basically life and the genetic code and the ability of genes to do different things. It's just like Lego. So you can't actually say there's a limit on microevolution. An arm is always an arm, a wing is always a wing. An arm never becomes a wing and a wing never becomes an arm. You can't say that. That's a completely false limit based on thin air. It just doesn't work that way. A really good example of this actually is the bat. There you have a member of the rodent species whose arms developed in such a way to allow flight. And they really are very obvious arms. You know, if you look at a bat's wing, it's rather different from bird's wing. It has the little claws on the end of the arm, and yet it's got this big wing appendage hanging down. It's very obviously arm and wing. How did organisms take flight in the first place? It was very likely to do with jumping. Legs developed that allowed jumping, and arms developed, and when the arms were moved about, jumping would have been higher. And if the arms had certain features that allowed the creature to stay aloft more, the jumping would have been higher still, until eventually an organism develops a particular arm/wing that allows it to stay aloft for long periods. And of course we have, you know, certain birds that can't fly very well, spend most of their time on the ground, yet they still have wings, you know? Evolution is messy. If it were intelligent design, we wouldn't expect it to be messy, would we? No. Look even at the elephant's trunk. It's very obviously a nose, and yet it has taken on certain properties that allows it also to function as a limb. And it's able to pick stuff up. Amazing, absolutely amazing, you know? Totally crazy looking, but amazing. That's the genetic diversity of life. Now, one of the objections that the creationist argues is that where are the missing links? You know, why do we not find fossils for creatures that were in the middle of being ground-based to flight? You know, why do we not find fossils for creatures that are not quite a bird yet, but on the way to being a bird? I think the reason for that is because there aren't enough of them. You know, when an adaptation is successful enough that the organism is able to do something successfully, like maintain flight, well then that organism will breed, and breed a lot. So there are going to be millions of them. So there is a sufficient quantity for at least some fossils to survive of that species. But on the road to becoming that creature, there would have been lesser quantities of that creature, therefore not enough to survive and provide fossils for us. Which is kind of what you would expect, isn't it? You would expect to find fossils where there were large numbers of a particular creature. And there can only be large numbers when it's a fully successful evolutionary adaptation. So evolution, all the work isn't done on the theory. There are disagreements about exactly how it works. But the general groundwork has been laid since Darwin. And there doesn't seem to be any serious disagreement about this in the scientific community, except by creationists who have a particular religious ideology that they have to defend, which is very interesting. So, evolution is here to stay. It's simply not realistic to think that the theory is going to go away. There may be further refinements to the theory over time, which is what you expect with the scientific process, but it's here. It's not going to go away. And it's very important. And I think if more people accepted it, I think we'd probably treat animals better than we do when we think we're so bloody special. Something to think about.